Hello, my name is Annalise Rohde, and I worked with Amisa Brewer-Hoffman and Elvin Zelan in conjunction with Trauma Free NYC to create this presentation entitled Adverse Childhood Experiences, What Educators Need to Know to Support Their Students.
Before we get started, we'd like to share a little bit of information about ourselves. We are currently students at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, who have recently completed a course on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and trauma-informed care. My name is Amisa Brewer-Hoffman, and I am a combined medical and public health student slated to graduate in 2022. My main focus is on pediatric neuroradiology and the impacts of outside stressors on brain development in children.
My name is Annalise Rohde. I am currently pursuing a dual master's in public health and social work and planning to graduate in 2022. My main area of interest is mental and behavioral health challenges in children.
My name is Elvin Zelan, and I am set to graduate next month, May 2021. My focus is in the interactions between aging and mental health, and I am writing my thesis on social connection in older LGBT adults during COVID.
First, let's go over some of the objectives for this webinar. This lecture is meant to help elementary school teachers understand the difference between adaptive stress and toxic stress caused by ACEs, to understand some of the impacts of ACEs on children's brains and how these might appear in your classroom, and to learn how you can add mindfulness meditation to your classroom toolkit to help address some of the effects of toxic stress.
Before diving in, we wanted to give a brief content warning. Some of the material discussed in this presentation, such as trauma and mental health challenges, may be sensitive to some. Please take care of yourself throughout the webinar and feel free to pause and take a break at any point. To begin, we wanted to provide information on adverse childhood experiences, commonly known as ACEs. ACEs were first identified as a result of a study completed by Kaiser Permanente, a managed care organization based in California. In this study, they determined ACEs as being split into three main categories: abuse, which includes physical, emotional, and sexual abuse; neglect, which includes both physical and emotional neglect; and finally, household dysfunction, which includes mental illness in the home, having an incarcerated relative, domestic violence, substance abuse in the home, and divorce. ACEs can have many significant effects throughout the life course, many of which are depicted in this graphic. Although all of these can impact children, there are two categories that would likely affect the students in your classroom the most. First, mental health challenges such as depression, anxiety, suicide, and PTSD can manifest in different ways in the classroom, such as difficulty paying attention, hyperactivity, or even falling asleep in class. Additionally, ACEs can impact a child's opportunities or likelihood of success in the classroom, in the workforce, and beyond. So it is crucial to understand the impacts of ACEs to best support your students. As we all know, stress is a normal part of life. However, how does toxic stress differ from the stress we experience every day? Positive stress can cause a brief increase in heart rate and mild elevations in stress hormone levels. For instance, when you are getting ready to take a test you studied for, positive stress can help you focus on the paper in front of you and recall information more easily. Tolerable stress includes more serious and temporary stress responses that are buffered by supportive relationships. These buffering relationships could be family, friends, or even a teacher. However, when stress response systems are activated for a prolonged period of time and there are no protective or supportive relationships to buffer the effects, children can experience lifelong negative outcomes. ACEs are actually extremely common, with over 67% of people in the US reporting having experienced at least one ACE, and 17% of people in the US reporting having experienced 4 or more ACEs. Additionally, half of the leading causes of death, including heart disease, cancer, respiratory diseases, diabetes, and suicide are all associated with ACEs. Finally, it is estimated that approximately 21 million cases of depression could have been potentially avoided by preventing ACEs. This was just a brief overview on ACEs. However, if you want to learn more, we've listed some resources that can provide more information. Feel free to pause here to take note of these resources. Next, my colleague Elvan is going to discuss the effects of ACEs on the brain.
Thank you, Annalise. As you said, I am now going to talk about how ACEs may cause changes to the brain and how that might impact behavior in your students. As Annalise mentioned earlier, there are different types of stress. Some stress is positive, meaning it can actually be beneficial. It is difficult enough to make us develop beneficial coping mechanisms and other skills, while not being difficult enough to cause long-term stress. Earlier, we gave an example of taking a test. As another example, think of when a child goes to school for the first time. Initially, they're very upset, but the change and the stress that goes along with it is necessary to form their independence and adjust to social settings away from their caregivers. However, if stress is chronic or severe enough, it causes toxic stress, which can cause negative effects to the brain. This is especially true in children. Because their brain is still developing, ACEs can have more of an impact. The prefrontal cortex is a structure highlighted in this diagram in the front of the brain. It is involved in executive function, which is the conscious control of behavior. ACEs can affect the prefrontal cortex in ways that cause challenges with planning, impulse control, decision-making, and maintaining focus. The hippocampus is a small structure near the center of the brain. It is specialized to create new memories. Because it is involved in making new memories all the time, it is highly adaptable and plastic, which may make it more susceptible to toxic stress. Toxic stress can cause changes to the hippocampus and interfere with the creation of new memories. The third and final brain structure I'm going to talk about today is the amygdala. The amygdala is highly involved in emotions, especially fear and stress. It activates the fight or flight response. ACEs can affect the amygdala to decrease ability to control negative responses, which can cause greater stress and vigilance, even when there isn't anything threatening around. Here is a visual representation of the impacts ACEs have on the brain. The darker red color indicates the areas of the highest activity in the brain. On the left is the brain of a child who had a childhood relatively free of ACEs. They likely did not experience enough stress or trauma to cause the negative changes I talked about earlier. In the circled region are the temporal lobes, which process sensory input and regulate emotions. And as you can see, this child has a lot of activity there. On the right is a child who was placed in a Romanian orphanage shortly after birth and had an upbringing with much more deprivation and trauma. It is important to note that the type of trauma the child on the right experienced can occur all over the world, no matter the setting. The deep kind of neglect they experienced caused a measurable impact on their brain. The temporal lobes, when compared to the healthy child, are almost inactive, and this is likely to indicate cognitive and emotional problems. Amisa is now going to talk about how changes in the brain due to ACEs might appear in a classroom setting.
Thank you, Elvan. Now I'm going to discuss how signs of toxic stress, or ACEs, may present in your classroom, and directly link some of the brain changes we just covered with key classroom behaviors. But first, here are some numbers to illustrate the severity of the problems that ACEs cause for children in school. First, a child has an 80% increased chance of being expelled for each additional ACE that they have. A child is also 10.6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled if there is domestic violence, one type of ACE, occurring in the home. If a child has 3 or more ACEs, they have a 2.72 times increased chance of being diagnosed with ADHD, which affects classroom performance and behavior. It is also important to note that the changes in brain architecture that we just explored translate into real changes in thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of your students. For example, that student who speaks out without raising their hand, or who seems to have poor time management, is exhibiting problems with impulse control and planning, likely a result of changes in the prefrontal cortex. And the student who often forgets homework or simple classroom instructions is exhibiting deficits in memory, which is a function of the hippocampus. And finally, that student who seems to have exaggerated emotional responses that are out of proportion to the situation at hand has issues with emotional regulation, which is a result of overactivation of the amygdala. These and other types of disruptive behaviors can be symptoms of something else, and kids are often trying to tell us something with their behaviors. Today, we urge you to take a compassionate approach to these behaviors, one that doesn't result in punitive measures for children who may be facing ongoing trauma. Now I'm going to read this quote from Tarasi and Crandall-Galars. All teachers should understand how trauma affects students' social, emotional, and academic growth. The more teachers understand how traumatic experiences affect student competencies, the more proactive they can be in creating trauma-sensitive learning environments that enable students to build caring relationships with adults and peers, self-regulate their emotions and behaviors, and succeed academically. Teachers sometimes struggle to manage their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Sometimes our reaction to disruptive classroom behavior is to raise our voice or be punitive. Right now, I'd like you to pause the video and reflect on a moment when a student's behavior caused you to react in this way. What could you do differently next time? After reflecting on this moment, it is important to not judge your reaction. The purpose of this exercise is simply to bring attention to our own behaviors and notice that next time we have the opportunity to respond calmly and with compassion. So, what are some things that we can do to mitigate the effects of toxic stress in the classroom? All children, but particularly those with high ACE scores, can benefit from an intentional classroom. This looks like a classroom where you establish safety explicitly, provide consistency, collaborate with students on classroom decision-making, validate student strengths, refer students to mental health services when appropriate, and when you incorporate stress-regulating activities like mindfulness and meditation into your classroom. Next, Annalise will speak more about adding meditation to your classroom toolkit.
As Amisa just mentioned, meditation is an excellent example of a stress regulating activity that can easily be utilized in a classroom. Research has demonstrated numerous positive biological and behavioral effects of meditation on children who have experienced trauma. Specifically, a 2011 research study published in the Journal of Psychiatric Research found that as a result of only 8 weeks of meditative practice, brain thickening occurred in areas associated with learning, memory, impulse control, perspective taking, empathy, and compassion, improving function in these domains. Additionally, after engaging in continued meditation practice, children can experience reduced blood pressure, heart rate, and cortisol levels. Finally, meditation can contribute to a decrease in size of the amygdala, which can decrease feelings of anxiety, fear, and stress. In terms of the behavioral effects of meditation, which are what you would most likely notice in your classroom, students will have increased attention, especially in children with ADHD, better attendance and school performance, improved mental health and socio-emotional development, and increased self-awareness and self-regulation. All of these impacts can come together to help a child feel safer at school and as a result, learn more effectively.
Now, I'm going to lead you through a sample 1-minute meditation activity. A meditation like this one can be completed daily in the classroom and can be altered to fit the specific needs or interests of your students. The three of us will be turning our cameras off during this meditation. First, find a comfortable place to sit, and I will guide you through the following meditation. We're going to spend the next minute focusing on our breathing. We will practice this every day when we feel calm, so that when we aren't feeling calm, we can focus on our breathing and feel calm again. Close your eyes or find a spot on the floor to focus on. Make sure to sit up with your back straight. Focus on your breathing and feel the air going in and out of your nose. Don't change how you are breathing, just pay attention to how it feels. If your mind wanders to other thoughts, try to bring it back to focus on your breath. Continue to focus on your breathing. Notice it going in, and out. When you are ready, gently open your eyes. We've completed our meditation. It is important to note that active meditation can be challenging, especially when just starting out. By continuing to practice meditation and mindfulness, you will be more able to effectively help your students. And before we end today, we wanted to provide you with some additional resources, both information on mindfulness and meditation and tips on getting started. Here we have a few TED Talks and documentaries listed where you can learn more about the benefits of meditation and even participate in some short exercises. And here we've listed some mobile applications for download that can help you, your students, and their families incorporate meditation into daily life. Feel free to pause the video to jot some down, keeping in mind that in addition to Insight Timer, which is always free, many of these apps have free trials or versions that you can use. We will also provide access to these slides so that you can come back to these resources again and again whenever you may need them.
Next, we're going to briefly share our supplemental materials for teachers and caregivers. For our first deliverable, we created a meditation guide and lesson plan that teachers can use to implement meditation into their classroom. Included in the guide are 2 sample meditations, one that lasts for 1 minute and is the same one we did earlier during the webinar, and one that lasts for 5 minutes. Teachers can either use these exact meditations or alter them for their class. Next, the guide provides information on why meditation is important and some of the positive impacts for children. Then the guide provides suggestions for when teachers can implement meditation throughout the school day. For instance, at the start of the day, right after recess, or at the end of the day. Finally, the guide provides additional resources that teachers can utilize in their classroom. The first 3 recommendations are for apps that provide pre-recorded meditations geared towards children of different ages if teachers want to implement more variety in their classroom meditations. The other 3 resources provide suggestions for apps that include other mindfulness activities, such as yoga and other breathing exercises.
Our second deliverable was intended for caregivers and families as a resource to be used at home outside of school. It explains what mindfulness meditation is, what it does, and why we are doing it in the classroom. It provides information on why parents might meditate too, either with their children or alone. Finally, It includes a short exercise with some possible changes after it that can be added for some variety, and some suggestions on how to live mindfully outside of regular meditation. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We hope you learned about how ACEs and toxic stress can impact children in your classroom, and we also hope that you feel better equipped to recognize and respond to some of these effects.